to put your name on the ticket. So this story is called A Brother's Shadow, and it's meant to represent the people who went into the forestry unit in the Second World War. So a lot of there was very little known about it, because a lot of the men came home, and because they didn't fight on the front lines, they were kind of put aside as a lesser service, and a lot of people thought when they were working in the woods they were out like chopping up wood out by the door, but that is certainly not what they were doing. And as a matter of fact, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't know, so I was delighted to do the research, and I actually cried a lot doing this book, just because like there's just so much. It was so close to home, but there was so much we didn't know because people didn't talk about it, because they were ashamed of their service, which is too bad, right? Like, you know, they left and they went over by themselves, and they didn't know where they were. War was less than 10 kilometers away from them. France was taken, they were right next door, across the strait, so like anything could have happened to them. And still, they were, when they come home, they were ashamed, which this book is hopefully going to correct. So instead of reading a little bit in the book, I'm just going to read you something first. A friend of mine, his grandfather was in the war, and he said when they were growing up, they were taught to make fun of their grandfather's service because he was only in the woods. So I wrote this little last piece in the book for that. So it's based on the recollections from a fellow whose grandfather served in the Newfoundland Overseas Forestry Unit and returned at the end of his 6-month contract. So in the beginning, they served for 6 months because a lot of people didn't think the war was actually going to happen. So they said, well, we'll sign you up for 6 months, come over. And then a lot of them went over and left and went into either the British Army or the Canadian Army. And then the British didn't want that, so when they came back to Newfoundland, they said, if you're able to go in the woods, you have to sign up till the end of the conflict. You're not coming over and going out on the lines. We need you in the woods. So that's how important that it was. So this is the fellow that came home. So in 1940, Liam, why are you home so soon? It was hard work, long hours. It's the first bit of regular money we ever had. Can you go back? I'm not going back. I was starving and worn out and lonesome. Oh, it couldn't be that bad. If you lived it, it was. You only worked in the woods, sure. Then in 1944, your brothers are back. They got war medals. I'm glad they're okay. They'll get money to settle in. You got none of that. I fished before going, and I'm fishing now. The whole town is throwing a parade for them and the others. You came home too soon for that. I stayed to the end of my contract. I did my duty. But you only worked in the woods, sure. In 1949, well, Lamboy, you should have come to the real war with us. We are going to get pensions out of it. So this was at the time of Confederation. I was in the real war. Maybe we'll get some someday. You're not war heroes. Everyone knows it. I went where Britain asked me to go. You only work in the woods, sure. Look at Lim, would you? So this is 1970. Out in the Remembrance Day parade. Why isn't he in a uniform like his brothers? He got homesick, came home out of it after 6 months. Homesick, that old fool, why would he parade for that? He only worked in the woods, sure. In 1975, so this is a grandson talking to him. Pops, how come you don't talk about the war? He wasn't in any war, not like us. We were in the Royal Air Force. But Pops was in Scotland. Yeah, for 6 months, then come home out of it, left to fighting to us. He only worked in the woods, sure. So this is like the attitude that the people got when they came back, was you only went in the woods. Because nobody had any idea what going in the woods actually meant. And it was a lot more than that. So in my research, I found out a few things. So my father was a war veteran. He served in the Newfoundland Overseas Forestry Unit for the entirety of the Second World War. My interest to write this story took a long time to grow, but it was really when I was in northern Scotland on a writing retreat and drove on the Newfoundland Road, and that's actually what it's called, the Newfoundland Road, that I made a firm commitment to dig in and get this done. I could feel the bumps in the road as they rose and fell over timbers where my father or any of the almost 4,000 members of the Newfoundland Overseas Forestry Unit would have lain during the war. So I could have been walking on ground that he had prepared to get the trucks and stuff in and out. When I spoke to some of the older folks there, they mentioned that the men weren't welcomed at first. Boys from another country were coming to Scotland to do the timbers while their own were going out on the front lines and being killed. So they didn't appreciate the Newfoundland people that were asking for things like salt pork and they didn't know what it was. And were eating oatmeal when they didn't know it, like when our fellas didn't know what it was. When the foresters came home, they weren't heralded. I didn't know about that perspective. Newfoundland had great losses of young men. Grieving families didn't understand the worth of the forestry unit when their own were dying or disabled. Even losses from the First World War were still fresh and our little dominion had not yet recovered. Many descendants of the Newfoundland Overseas Forestry Unit members are unaware of the contribution of the unit to winning the war. So without the unit, we probably would be speaking a different language. I am hoping the work of historical fiction will paint a true picture of this brave company, what they did, how they lived, and what they suffered. As a bit of a background, the Second World War, when it broke out, Newfoundland was not a self-governing dominion like it had been during the First World War. Poverty was rampant, fish prices were low, the economy had not rebounded from the Great Depression. The Commission of Government at the time was a group of 7 people, and the governor was Sir Humphrey Baldwin, and he reached out to Britain and said, what can we do? It was made clear the first critical need was to get timber. Britain, despite having lots of forests, was experiencing issues, not only because shipping had disrupted, but also because they had no resources to harvest the wood. There was a critical shortage of pit crops, so that was for the coal mines, telegraph poles, rail ties, and more in the empire. And without production, there were serious impacts to mining, shipbuilding, and other industries reliant on wood, which was a lot at the time. And a shortage which negatively impacted large-scale manufacturing and put winning the war at risk. So without the men that went in the woods, somebody here are all related to me, have uncles, grandfathers, fathers, whatever. Without them, the war would not have been won. And that was something I didn't know until I wrote this book. And a lot of people don't know it. So I'm hoping that at least this book will bring some insight to that. Now, it's not spouting history at you. It's a story about a young man named Frank Hollis. And Frank lives on Farewell Island, which is a small made-up island in Placentia Bay. And he goes to war. He falls in love with a girl at home, like they used to years ago. There wasn't very many on the go, so you picture. But he fell in love with a girl, and his brother claimed her and wanted to marry her. So Frank decides to leave because he can't live in his brother's shadow. So his brother, who takes off to go to war, ends up fighting with the British Army, and Frank goes off. When he gets to St. John's, he has to sign up for the forestry unit. So while he's there, we get to see everything that happened in Scotland, and also what happened to the women that were left behind. So the women, like his mother is I loved her in this book. She's a really, really strong, she was a widow woman, she raised her 2 boys by herself. She didn't want to get married because she knew what happened to people. They were scourged having babies, and then they were like, you know, it was just a hard time. Now living by herself with 2 youngsters wasn't easy either, but she was prepared to do it. So she was kind of the bright light in Farewell Island. She got things done. She got the fishing, she got the, you know, everything done, and she taught the women how to do stuff. And one thing that I learned was when they were knitting for the army and for the forces, like they did, women back then, they not one thing, not a mitten, not a finger of a mitten was sent to the forestry unit. They weren't considered soldiers. So they got nothing from home while everybody else did, right? So like there was things like that that seem so unfair now, but there were things that nobody would have taught about back in the day, right? So anyway, Frank ends up in Scotland, and over in Scotland, all the men, you know, that could fight were gone. So he had the Newfoundland bunch, and some of them married off to some of the women, but the older crowd that were there didn't like that, because the men were coming taking the women. When their men came back to be nobody left, I don't know how many they thought they were bringing. But anyway, so like there was all kinds of confusion about it. Even the food, like the men were used to like rough grub here, and it's a different rough grub over there. So they like, and it was kind of like they couldn't speak the same language, even though it was all English, but they couldn't speak the same language. So like they did have a really, really hard time, but they worked really hard. And because they were the first over there, they built the barracks, they built the camps, then they moved and built the next camps and brought people over from Newfoundland. And Newfoundland sent out people, like trains across the province to get people on them to come back to go to war. But they were only allowed to sign up to go in the woods. They weren't allowed to do anything else. When they came back, they were treated like not heroes, they weren't heralded, and they kind of like went underground, more or less. Like they didn't talk about their service, they didn't talk about what they did, because nobody cared, because like I said, they thought you were out cutting up wood out the side of the fence, you know, for the fires or something. So like they didn't understand what the men were doing, and they were actually saving the war. Like they were saving everybody for us. They were saving the empire for what we have today, and we don't know it. So anyway, that's enough for me. I'll shut up. I hope you enjoy the book. I really do. It's just out like a week. We are getting really good reviews on it, so I'm hoping people will enjoy it. It's a little bit different for me because I had to write to the history of what they did. So I had to do a lot of research, wrote to the history. Then I put them in Confederation, which was another schmozzle because Joey Smallwood threw him under the bus. He was like, I don't know what they did over there, right? You know, they don't deserve pensions. So they got pensions in 2000. So they fought in the Second World War and they got their pensions in 2000. So how many lived to be, you know, to that era? But that was when they got their first pensions. So, like, there's so many unbelievable things that's in here, and everything that you read in here is researched and it's the truth. And I said I was going to shut up, and I didn't, so I'm going to shut up. So anyway, enjoy a cup of tea, and I'll be here. These books are hardcover are 25, softcover are 20, and you can pay debit or credit, whatever you want. All right?